Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 819B, and today's date is November 16th, 2015, and the title of this episode is Putin Exposes the West Funding ISIS as the West Pushes Europe into the Syrian War. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, from Edward Snowden, we realize that the government is continually spying on the people, even though the NSA is saying that they're not going to be spying on the people because of the USA Freedom Act. We know the corporations will be spying on the people, and everyone has to take protection. I mean, you need to use encryption to hide your content of your emails or anything that you're doing. You can use startpage.com that will hide your searches so they can't track you. You can even use the proxy section of it that will hide where you are located. You can use products like blockitpocket.com, which is a sleeve interwoven with different metals, and you can slide your credit card in there that has the RFID chip in there. You can slide in your license that has that chip in there. You can slide your cell phone into that so they don't track you. So there are many different ways that you can absolutely protect yourself, and we should make it harder and harder for the government to get our personal information. You do not leave your keys with the government and tell them to come into your house anytime you want. You don't give them authorization to get into your bank account. So why in the world would we give them them your authorization to come in and listen in or take your texts, your email, your searches, or anything private to you? Why would you allow them to track you? It makes no sense. But privacy advocates, they have a new warning out there. And there's a new threat that uses inaudible, high-frequency sounds to track a person's online behavior across a range of devices, including phones, TVs, tablets, and computers. The ultrasonic pitches are embedded into TV commercials or are played when a user encounters an ad displayed in a computer browser. Now, the sound can't be heard by the human ear, but other devices can hear and detect these sounds. When they do, browser cookies can now pair a single user to multiple devices and keep track of what TV commercials the person sees, how long the person watches the ads, whether the person acts on the ads by doing a web search or buying a product. They are continually finding out different ways to spy on you. And remember, with the USA Freedom Act, it allows the corporations to do the spying. With CISA, which they're trying to pass right now, the Senate has already approved it. We're just waiting to see what happens with this. It will allow the companies then to take that information and pass it along to the government. And the companies will not be held liable. And of course, cross-device tracking raises important privacy concerns. The Center of Democracy and Technology wrote in a recently filed comments to the FTC saying this is unacceptable. You're infringing on people's privacy. Now, out in South Korea, there were mass protests and they were anti-government protests in Seoul. 70,000 people have taken to the streets of Seoul. This is the largest South Korean anti-government rally in years. The security forces fired tear gas, water cannons. Protesters smashed police vehicles. And there were 20,000 riot police dispatched to basically go after these rioters. But of course, the corporate media, you heard nothing about this. All we've been hearing about is France and the terrorist attacks. In Ukraine, we are seeing that the Ukraine military is shelling the Donetsk area once again. And they opened fire at the Volvo Center in that area. We see that Ukraine right now, according to Poroshenko, is being threatened by the Islamic State. He's saying that the country faced new threats from people linked, not actually the Islamic State, but linked to the Islamic State. Seems like something's about to happen in Ukraine. So basically what we're seeing right now is they're saying that they're following threats, they're getting chatter, and we know the Minsk II ceasefire comes up this December. Kiev has not mentioned they're going to renew it. They've been starting to shell into the Donetsk Lugansk area once again. They're moving their equipment all around, and now they're getting warnings about the Islamic State terrorism. Now, these aren't the actual Islamic State. They're saying links to it. Most likely they will blame this, guess what, on the southeastern people to get this war started. Now, out in Yemen, we see that the Red Cross right now, the ICRC, has called for the end of bombing hospitals in Yemen. They're accusing the Saudi Arabian forces, which is backed by the United States, for carrying out all of these attacks. They're saying that the attacks are close to 100 already since March. The neutrality of healthcare facilities and staff is not being respected. Health facilities are deliberately attacked, and surgical and medical supplies are also being blocked from reaching hospitals. And this is coming from the head of the ICRC. Amnesty International has criticized the U.S. and other states for fueling the conflict while doing little to stop the human rights violations. So right now, the United States, with their proxy army, Saudi Arabia, is going all out in Yemen. They don't care what they do there. Just like they did in Afghanistan, just like they're doing in Syria, they don't care. They realize that the Middle East is falling apart, and right now it doesn't matter what they do because they need to get control of all these countries, and this is why they're pushing so hard. And we know at this point, if they cannot gain control of all these Middle Eastern countries, the petrodollar is going to collapse, and it looks like we are headed in that direction. Because in Yemen, their plans are not going well. In Libya, they have already bombed over the weekend. The U.S. sent in F-15s and bombed inside of Libya. Of course, they were saying they're going after the Islamic State, but we know this is not what they're bombing, because the Islamic State is the proxy army for the United States government. We understand the talks broke down for Libya. There is no mutual government. And we knew from John Kerry, who said we need a decision by October 20th, where something's going to happen, and that something has happened, and it will continue to happen as we go along. Now, we realize out in Europe, the refugee situation is getting worse and worse, and a lot of the countries are setting up fences, barbed wire, and they don't want these refugees inside of their countries. So looks like a lot of these European countries are basically taking away the Schengen visas, and they're doing away with pretty much everything. And this is exactly what the United States government really wants. They want chaos in the region. They want Europe to say, we can't take this anymore, so we need to go after the problem. And we have to remember, these refugees, they're not Syrian. They've been collected and kept in Turkey. And then Turkey said, or somebody mentioned to these refugees, that they will have a better life in Europe. And then they let them loose. And we see herds and herds of refugees going throughout Europe. So Poland decides to come out with this statement saying that maybe we should take the refugees pouring into Europe, train them into an army, and send them back to Syria to liberate Syria. This is what they're trying to do right now, because the war in Syria is lost. The United States, the coalition forces, lost in Syria. Russia and Assad are winning. They are pushing the Islamic State out of the country. Right now, the U.S. is airlifting a lot of the Islamic State out of the country. Special forces are in there destroying intelligence. And they're being pushed further and further east. Right now, we understand that Syria and Russia has taken control of Aleppo. And then we had this incident over the weekend on Friday the 13th. And we see it is a false flag event. This is to get everyone together, ready to fight this next war. Now, the French president decided to go ahead and start bombing the Islamic State in Syria, which we know this is not what they're bombing. They're hitting the infrastructure of Syria. They'll be going after Assad in Syria. At the same time, Russia's air campaign against the Islamic State in Syria added significantly to the Syrian army offensive, and they pretty much have taken back Aleppo. They destroyed the Islamic State convoy loaded with weapons and ammunition that was supplied to them by the United States. And we know for a fact at this point, the Islamic State is doomed. They're being shipped off into Yemen and into Libya. Now, to get Europe together, they needed some type of an event. And this is the first of many to see how this turns out. Right now in England, we see Prime Minister David Cameron says he wants Britain to take part in airstrikes against the Islamic State. He's trying to get the MPs he's trying to convince them that we need to do this. This is the call to go to war. This is what's happening right now. Now, while all this is happening, we know the U.S. government and other intelligence agencies are continually saying that because we can't get through the encryption, this poses a problem. Because what Edward Snowden did, the terrorists know exactly how we pick up their chatter. Well, I'm sorry, but if there is truly a terrorist, there is no way they're going to be going onto Twitter and broadcasting what they're going to do. There's no way they're going to be going on Facebook to tell everyone what they're going to be doing. They're going to be using methods that you cannot detect, like paper or any other way of doing this. They're not going to put it on the net. It makes no sense. Of course, this is what they want you to believe. But if they were truly trying to convince us and we believe their story, why didn't they stop all the other attacks? The FBI, CIA, and all the other agencies, they could not stop any of the attacks. And this is when no one really knew that they were spying on the people. Because all of this is ginned up by the CIA, FBI, Mossad, MI6. This is why they never can stop those events. Actually, when asked what events they have stopped, they couldn't name any. And that's from the NSA. They couldn't mention any. All the FBI ones are patsies. People they say they have Islamic State links to, but they're not really part of the Islamic State. They were chatting on the internet, and then they had an undercover agent go in there and convince these people they needed to do something, and they never really did it. They said they were going to do it, and then they arrest them. And if they needed a bomb, a gun, or anything, they provide them with that weapon. They never got it on their own. They were all patsies. So with all this power and the demand that encryption be outlawed, not any of this surveillance has stopped any terrorist attack. 9/11, Boston bombers. The Boston bombers were using cell phones, if you believe the official story. Why didn't they get the information? They didn't catch them. I mean, it's just the Charlie Hebdo. Okay, why didn't they catch him there? The recent attack. They had no information whatsoever that this was going to happen. Nothing. Completely clueless. Because these are inside jobs, that's why. That's why they had no idea what was going on. Now, let's go through what actually happened in Paris, who benefits from all of this, and what they're trying to do. Now, we understand that there were many things happening in France during this time period. And all of a sudden, we had this violent atrocity that shocked the world. There's a huge uproar. And basically, all eyes are moved to this incident. Now, at the same time, we know the United States and the coalition forces were losing ground in Syria. Russia was doing what the United States was supposed to be doing in about 2 months, 2 to 3 months. They were completely destroying the Islamic State, because we know the United States was destroying the infrastructure, not the Islamic State. They were destroying the infrastructure of Assad. So they needed some type of an event to basically distract everyone. We know that Obama and Putin were going to meet at the G20 and talk about Syria. And as soon as this happened, those talks were completely pretty much done, and they were talking about what happened in France. Now, if we believe the official story in France, and let's go down this track for a second here. We have the Islamic State. They were shooting up everyone everywhere. And we know there's strict gun laws in France. Now, France, the far-right party, they're calling the nation to rearm itself, which makes sense, because if you have a terror group, if we believe the official story, then shouldn't the citizens feel safe? And how do you feel safe? Well, it's not going to be with a knife. It's not going to be with a fork or a spoon. We're going to need a weapon to protect ourselves. And at this point, every country, if this terror is real, everyone should have a weapon to protect themselves. Because do you really want to be in a situation where all of a sudden the Islamic State is out there and they start shooting up people? So we should have the right now, well, in the U.S. we do, but it should be everywhere where we carry a weapon. Everywhere we go. Can you imagine if everyone had a weapon in France? This would have been over in about 20 seconds. Everyone would have pulled out their weapon. The Islamic State, done, if you believe the official story. But they don't want us talking about that part of it. They want us to be afraid. They want us to be nervous and scared. That's their agenda. Now, the corporate media, the governments throughout Europe, even Greece came out and said, oh yes, we found a refugee Syrian passport. Of course, that was the link to Syria. And they're saying refugees are the problem. And they're trying to convince Europe of this, so they band together to go into Syria. But when we look at the actual perpetrators of the attacks, we see that, are they really refugees? I mean, let's take a look at this. Mustafi Ismail Omar, he was 29, opened fire in the Bataclan Theater. He blew himself up, and he grew up in the suburb of Paris. Is he a refugee? No. Sami Amamour, 28. He was the gunman in the theater. He blew himself up. Born in Paris. Living in the suburb of Drancy. Is he a refugee? No. Third attacker in the Bataclan. Bilal Hadfi. He lived in Belgium. Not a refugee either. He blew himself up. Salah Abdesalam, 26. Lived in Belgium. Not a refugee. And it seems like they can't find him right now. They're saying he might be killed. And then Brahim Abdeslam, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he's 31, brother of Salal. And he would have blown himself up, but it looks like they took him in. But he lived in Belgium. He is not a refugee either. So this talk about refugees is not adding up. And then we find out that the Syrian passport is a complete and definite forgery. And it was found, of course, next to the suicide, one of the suicide bombers. Of course, whenever you go and you're a terrorist, you bring your license, you bring your passport. Make sure you have all the identification on you to make sure that people can identify you afterwards. After you blow yourself up And we've seen this many times before. This is nothing new. So how do we spot a false flag? Well, as soon as it gets immediate national coverage, there's a political agenda, incident inspires intense emotion, initial media stories conflict with official story, no dead bodies, celebrities used to influence citizens, mainstream media manipulation tactics, federal government attention. So when we look at this, we see, okay, number one, we know there were drills on the same day. EMTs were there for a drill, and luck would have it, there's an incident. Number two, the terrorist passport magically found. We saw this back in Charlie Hebdo, in 9/11. Seems like they're following the same exact script. There's no difference whatsoever. Number three, the terrorists are already known to French authorities. Of course they knew them. They're the ones who they use for this. They're the patsies. So they are already known. But they had no other information whatsoever. And then, of course, we had a terrorist scream out, I'm from ISIS, to make sure the corporate media gets this and everyone knows he is from ISIS. And this is showing that, yeah, this is a complete setup false flag. Terrorists then state the reason for the shooting. This is for Syria, to make the link. And then they drop the passport. Because they need to make sure that everyone is clear on what is going on right now. So at the same time all of this is happening, we had some coincidences. And I don't believe in coincidences. We had the G20 summit going on where Putin was going to be there, Obama talking about Syria, which was on the agenda. And of course, this event kind of sidetracked everything. We also have the climate change summit occurring at the same period of time in this month. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that this was completely staged. I mean, here are some questions we have to understand. The operatives, they were armed with automatic weapons and explosive belts. How could they have entered and attacked all these sites completely unnoticed? How is this possible? Dressed in black, heavily armed. Does that make any sense? Because the French security agencies, they knew about these people. Why was nothing done to prevent this? They knew about it because it was planned. French authorities claim 3 terrorist teams carried out well-coordinated attacks. Do they know more than they're telling? Because how do they know this was well-coordinated? Le Monde reported one team fled Paris by car with a Belgian license plate. Paris police chief Michael Cadat said all attackers were killed. So we have the conflicting stories. French President Hollande came right out and said it was the Islamic State. That's how you know right away. As soon as they have the information that that's who it is, you know it's a complete false flag. Because how do you know who's doing it? There's shootings that are happening all the time in all different cities, and they have no clue who is doing anything. But this shooting, which is occurring in all different locations, they know exactly who it is. Without even speaking to anyone or investigating anything, they just know. So we can see all of this is occurring, but who benefits from this? Well, it's very interesting, coming out of the Times of Israel, that French Jewish security officials were informed of an impending large terrorist attack in France. So the people who are Jewish were informed that this was going to go down. Now, I have nothing against any people. When I talk about these things, I am talking about the governments. When I talk about the U.S., it's not the people of the U.S., it is the government of the U.S. When I talk about the people of France, it is the government. Here, Israel has something to benefit from this. One, France was supporting Palestine. Two, they have sanctions against Israel, some of their products. And Netanyahu has warned France. And we can see, as of right now, what would be the motive of the Islamic State to go into France at this point? No motive. I mean, think about it. They went in there to get more coalition forces into Syria to bomb them? It makes no sense whatsoever. Now, this is coming out of Conspiracy Club, where they found this tweet. And the tweet says, breaking, death toll from Paris terror attacks rises to at least 120, with 270 others injured. And the tweet was done on 11/11/2015. And the IP address was assigned to Virgin Media Consumer Broadband in the UK. How did they know this beforehand? And we've seen this in 9/11 when they reported that Building 7 was coming down before it actually happened. We've seen this in many other instances. Now, as soon as this happens, France declares war on Syria. Now, Paul Craig Roberts is out there, and they're saying, while this was happening, that France, Paris, was under a massive cyber attack 48 hours prior to the attacks. It took down the French mobile data network and blinded police surveillance. It was a very sophisticated attack. Late Sunday night, the New York Times lied, saying French warplanes struck the Islamic State targets in Syria in retaliation for attacks. Well, I hate to say this. They cannot coordinate that quickly and get the forces there and have everything ready to go. This had to have been prepped ahead of time. And what we are seeing right now is that all of this was planned. Because right now the U.S. is urging France and Turkey to put special forces on the ground in Syria. They want ground troops in Syria. It will make it difficult for Russia to bomb in certain areas. What are they going to do? Bomb the French troops? Bomb the Turkish troops? Bomb the U.S. troops? So Obama is out there, and he's saying that large deployment of U.S. troops on ground would be a complete mistake to go after the Islamic State. And he's saying having 50,000 or 20,000 soldiers would be a big mistake. So he's setting everyone up right now to accept at least 10,000 or another 5,000. This is what he's doing right now. Holland right now, President Hollande, is urging a grand coalition to go into Syria to destroy the Islamic State. And we know they're not going to be destroying the Islamic State. They're going to be going after Assad. Because they don't... Why do they need the help right now to destroy the Islamic State? Russia is already doing it. They've already done what the coalition forces couldn't do within a year plus. Why all of a sudden do they need their help? They don't. So what we see right now is what started as a civil war in Syria and the U.S. funding the Islamic State, the Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda. We see the corporate media now saying that Syria's civil war is now Europe's war after the Paris attacks. And this was the plan all along, at least part of the agenda, is to get Europe involved in this war. Now, while all this is happening, the FBI is reporting that weapons were stolen from an Army Reserve weapons depot in Massachusetts. It's very interesting. They're saying 6 semi-automatic rifles and 10 pistols. The thieves snuck in through the roof and stole the weapons. Now, we need to keep this in mind. Of course, they're saying there's no indication that these missing weapons are connected to any kind of terrorism whatsoever. But as we know, this is most likely what they're going to be used for. Now, Putin is out there and he is calling out 40 countries, saying there are 40 countries right now that are funding the Islamic State. And these are including G20 member states. So he's saying to the world, we know who you are. We know that you've been funding them. We know that you've been supplying them with weapons. And he asked a question that out of everything that we've seen and all the photos that were taken from aircraft, we can see the illegal trade in oil and petroleum products. The motorcade of refueling vehicles stretch for dozens of kilometers, and you can see how many trucks there are continually taking the oil and bringing it outside of Syria. Throughout the year, why hasn't the U.S. destroyed the convoys? I mean, we see the convoys of the Toyota trucks. We see the convoys of pretty much everything else. The U.S. can't spot this. Russia spotted it. And then all of a sudden, the New York Times today puts out a report that the U.S. is now hitting the oil truck convoys. Well, at this point, the U.S. is not going to be depending on the Islamic State to go after Assad. There will be another incident, another event, where either a U.S. or a Russian plane, force, grenade, missile, doesn't make a difference. Someone will be killed and something will occur. Now, the CIA chief is out there. CIA Director John Brennan warned Monday that attacks in Paris were likely not a one-off event. And he's saying that there's going to be more. Now, of course, there's going to be more because you have to remember the authorization for war is still pending. Yes, they're letting Obama do whatever he wants in Syria. But if he decides to bring in 10, 15,000 soldiers into this area, it will not work. And he knows it. He can try, but it's not going to work. So what they need to do is they need to set off events in Europe, which they're doing. And once these events take hold, they have to see the outcome. How are the people reacting to this? Are they for this? Can we bring troops in? If they show that, no, the people still do not want troops in this area, they will stage another event. Now, this might occur in Europe once again, maybe in the UK, because we know David Cameron's trying to make the case with the MPs to convince them that, yes, we need to go into Syria. Once that occurs, they will finally, if the U.S. people are not convinced and they can't get any traction, they will bring the events here to the United States. ISIS is already making their threats. Of course, this is the U.S. threatening the people of the United States. If you do not do what we say, we will attack Washington. And we will hit different areas. So they're saying that they already have plans for about 15 different states. Remember when I talked about operatives standing by, getting the green light for the go-ahead for the major event? Well, they already have plans in 15 states. They're going to name a few. Here's 5 of the states they named: Virginia, Maryland, Illinois, California, and Michigan. Right now, the U.S. is deploying the USS Harry Truman, the aircraft carrier, and its strike group to get into the Middle East. It will join the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, and it will wage war on Assad in this area. We are entering into World War III at this point. The U.S. was backed into a corner. The coalition forces backed into the corner. And this is their only way out. The economy is collapsing. It's accelerating. And this is the event they need to cover up the entire collapse of the system. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.